Hello.
Hi.
All right, let's get started. My name
Yay.
is Sarah, and I'm the Education Assistant at Dunlop Art Gallery. Welcome to tonight's program, Film School Belonging as Resistance. Before we get started tonight, I'd like to acknowledge that Dunlop Art Gallery and RPL Film Theatre are situated on Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. So Laurie Townshend is joining us from Toronto tonight, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. And connecting with us shortly, Janine Windolph is joining us from Treaty 7 territory in Banff tonight, which is the ancestral and traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Sorry, mispronouncing that, Kenai, Piikani, and the Siksika, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and Stoney Nakoda Nations of Wesley, Chiniki, and Bears Paw. All right, so let's take a moment to introduce Laurie Townshend, tonight's presenter. So writer, director, educator, and photographer Laurie Townshend credits her mantra, "You have as many hours in a day as Beyonce," for her ability to make groundbreaking films while successfully lobbying her eighth graders for coolest teacher nods. With a thematic lens aimed squarely on the acts of courage made visible through crisis, The Railpath Hero from 2013 features a spellbinding performance by Stephan James, Selma Race Beale Street, in a story about the threads of resilience that hold a young athlete's life together in the wake of childhood sexual abuse. Laurie's take on human connectedness is explored in Human Frequency Street Docs from 2014. Award-winning Charlie 2016 connects the works of late civil rights activist Charles Roach to today's Black Lives Matter movement. Currently, Laurie is in pre-production on Mothering in the Movement, set for 2022, a coming-of-middle-age saga that follows Stacey Ann Chin, Brooklyn's most outspoken poet activist and poster mom for radical Black parenting, as she raises her daughter Zuri, while investigating the past of her own mother who abandoned her as an infant. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all that you've done to make this night possible. Welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here for session number 2 of Film School. As Sarah mentioned, in my other life, I'm a teacher, so I spend my day with these students. Or some iteration of this classroom throughout the day, and then I get to spend my evening with my peers and other people who are just as excited about talking film and talking about the messaging and storytelling in cinema. So I'm just really excited to be here. What was I going to say? Yes. So last month, if you missed last month, I'm not going to hold it against you, but the Regina Public Library has provided such an amazingly safe and rich space for discussion. And so I'm just really glad that you're here tonight if you happen to miss our first session. It's going to be a real treat. You made a good choice. But seriously, this opportunity to transcend our physical separation and connect through storytelling and through film is rare. I'm grateful to you all for being here, and I want to applaud everybody at RPL and Dunlop Art Gallery, as well as VacuView for making this happen. The 2 films selected for tonight's discussion may on the surface seem unrelated, and it might strike you as odd that they make up this program on belonging as resistance. I feel like I should explain a little bit about how this program came to be. When I was asked to curate the films for RPL's Film School, I was thrilled to get the chance to A, program films that spoke to themes of my choosing, and B, I got a chance to dig into VacuView's, I might have pronounced that wrong earlier, VacuView's vast film library. At the same time, I found myself wading through these many films in VacuView's library. I was reading at the same time one of my favorite researchers and authors, Brene Brown. And she does a lot of work on vulnerability, if you know of her work, vulnerability, shame, and belonging. And her work, her research has changed the way a lot of people think about themselves and their interactions with others. So I came across this interview as I was trying to, nail down the theme for this month. And I came across an interview with Brene Brown in which she spoke about an aspect of her research on belonging that really surprised her. I'm going to just read to you a very short excerpt from that interview. She says that, as it turns out, men and women who have the deepest sense of true belonging are people who also have the courage to stand alone when called to do that. They are willing to maintain their integrity and risk disconnection in order to stand up for what they believe in. So Brown's research surprised her. It surprised her because she thought belonging was something that people negotiated in an external way with the groups to which they seek belonging. And I was immediately struck by the paradox, and I love a good paradox, that it's ultimately those willing to risk disconnection and isolation even, because they know unequivocally who they are, who have the deepest sense of true belonging. Some might call it luck. Perhaps it was some sort of curator angel who intervened, but I found 2 films that spoke to this sense of true belonging. A feature documentary, Citizens of Nowhere, by Nicolas Andre Tremblay, and Mia, a captivating animated film by Amanda Strong and Bracken Hanus Corlett. So if you've had a chance to watch these films beforehand and you've already met these beautiful characters who, for me, reflect this deep sense of belonging because of how firmly they stand in who they are, even as they wander city streets or wait along the threshold of guarded borders. It is my belief that in rooting themselves in ancient knowledge, honoring those who've gone before them, proclaiming their subjectivity and owning their cultural identity, these courageous individuals, both real and fictional, are confronting colonialism and resisting its forces of erasure. If you haven't watched these films yet, don't dismay. You may do so for free by signing up for a ViewCoView membership. These films will be available to watch for free until February 8th. The link to sign up and view films will be posted in the comment section, either now or toward the end of our session. And yeah, I think we're almost about ready to jump into this with our special guest. The other thing I should mention is that while we're on the subject of comment section, throughout the evening, please post your questions and comments for me and our special guest, Janine, who I'm about to introduce. If you're an inhabitant of the Twitterverse, you can also tweet your comments and questions using hashtag RPL Film School and tag RPL Film Theater on Twitter. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our special guest. Look, just like magic, she's popped up. Hi, Janine.
Hello.
I'm going to just read your bio really quick here, and then we're going to get into it. I'm so happy that you're here. Janine Windolph, a Atikamek Woodland Cree, is a Saskatchewan-based filmmaker and interdisciplinary artist and storyteller. She is the Associate Director of Indigenous Arts at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, and was previously the curator of community engagement at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina, Saskatchewan. Janine's filmography includes roles as producer, director, narrator, writer, and editor. She directed Stories Are in Our Bones, Life Givers, Honoring Our Elders and Children, The Land of Rock and Gold, and Ayapiyak Oma Nyanin. How did I do on that one, Janine?
Pretty good. Ayapiyak.
Which translates, only us, we are here at home. She produced from up north and provided production support and was a storyteller for the Beacon Project Stories of Capel Valley. Janine was a co-producer for RISE, RIIS Media Project, Inc., and co-directed Rise from Amnesia, Recovering the Lost Legacies, that explores the history of the Regina Indian Industrial School. This led to the formation of Rise Commemorative Association, Inc., and she's president. As president, Janine helped the organization achieve municipal and provincial heritage designation. Janine has volunteered for Saskatchewan Film Pool Cooperative, Miss Pond, a celebration of Indigenous filmmaking, Commonweal, and Reconciliation Regina. She is currently providing production support to the Buffalo Mountain Video Project that is part of homeschooling for her two sons, her two teenage sons. She is currently a board member for Princess Trust Canada. I'm sorry about that last little bit. Welcome. Janine. It's so good to have you here.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and it is a mouthful, so it's okay.
I'm trying to rush through it because we have so much to discuss today. And we have less than an hour. But over the next 45 minutes, Janine and I will engage in a dialogue around some of the themes raised by our two selected films. And as we bounce around, the RPL tech wizards will be attempting to keep up with us by showing short clips, which I will do my best to cue from the films, along with some guiding questions that will be up on the screen. And like I've already mentioned, we'd love to have you, our guests, add questions and comments via the comment section so that this is as much of a dialogue, a round table, a community conversation as possible. So let's dive in. So colonialism in all its manifestations and all its glory. By design, colonialism, Janine, renders nations divided and families trapped, individuals broken and unable to pick up the pieces once they've been exploited. So it's no surprise that after a long history of being colonized by France and Spain, Haiti, the nation at the center of Citizens of Nowhere, continues to suffer greatly. In the short animated film Mia, the legacy of colonialism is seen in the decimated landscape and in the moment of Mia's or the salmon's capture. While clips 1 and 2 are being queued up, Janine and I we invite you to consider some of these guiding questions. And we're going to talk about these questions. We can do that maybe after we've seen the clips. Janine, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Okay, so these questions, which will appear on screen, what does this film reveal about the ways this Haitian-Dominican rivalry has been manufactured? And for that matter, any false narrative about any group of people, this idea of a manufactured rivalry. What can the average citizen do to confront or reverse this narrative? What role does education play in setting the historical record straight? What does it mean that the very people impacted by this propaganda are denied access to critical pedagogy, higher education, etc.? So just some lighthearted questions to think about. All right, let's take a look at clips 1 and 2. First from Citizens of Nowhere and then Mia.
Throughout its history, my idyllic island has suffered tremendously. Colonized by two different powers, we have unfortunately inherited the rivalry of our motherlands. I remember the civil wars and the countless invasion attempts. I remember the massacre of 1937. And who can forget the earthquake that recently made the earth tremble? My people bear permanent scars. In spite of our differences, we have learned how to back each other up and live together. Haitians and Dominicans are not hereditary enemies. When Haitians
Yeah. And then Mia, a short clip from the animated film. Maybe while that's being, it's here. Hmm. So two very different moments here, and reflections on the legacy of colonialism and what it leaves in its wake. What do you make of this notion of manufactured rivalries that have really has divided Haitians and Dominicans, at least on some level? It's like the author or the narrator said, who happens to be a Haitian poet, Jean-Claude Martineau. It's a manufactured. They're not hereditary rivals. I was shocked when I heard that.
Oh, yeah. No, very powerful. I mean, you think of some of the narratives of Indigenous people that we're still facing today, and a lot of those are manufactured. And those narratives, unfortunately, need more education and storytelling, actually. The more stories we share that come from a place of authenticity, that's that form of resistance that I'm really interested in as a filmmaker, because I feel like just to be an Indigenous woman and to be here today is my form of resistance. So just to exist and to be able to have my voice heard, I feel like that for myself is one of those bigger challenges of changing those narratives and coming from creating more of a dialogue rather than this just kind of umbrella narrative, which you definitely feel in Citizens of Nowhere. Like, they're very strong. The one thing I know about watching the film is they were very good at getting different points of views, and those who were sharing those and I guess resharing those narratives, they were quite passionate. So I actually felt they believed what they were saying, which actually scared me the most watching that film.
You mean some of the individuals, like the educated professor who held some of these deep-seated, misguided, and just downright racist viewpoints about about Haitians with Dominican ancestry? Yeah, it was really shocking, and you're right, very terrifying. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm in education, but and this is probably dangerous to do, but to expect a certain level of critical intelligence on the part of educators. And like, this was when I heard her name and title came up as university professor, I was like, whoa. Not only is that terrifying to know that, a woman of, with this position has those attitudes, but she's responsible for passing them on to hundreds of people, younger people, every year, through her class. So that is terrifying. But I'm really interested and love what you said about, using your film making and storytelling as a way of resistance, as a way of countering the narratives that prevail. I haven't seen a lot of your work, and I can't wait until I can. But do you set out from the outset, making work in response to these false narratives, or is it coming from a place of not responding? Because sometimes, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that.
Oh, no, that's great. I mean, it's from not connecting to the narratives that are out there. I grew up in L'Orange, Saskatchewan, and it's a very different culture than you often see. Like, you see Navajos represented in kind of more Hollywood Western themes, and you see a lot different, I guess, more Plains culture in terms of, and that becomes like a pan-Indianism in terms of how people look at Indigenous people. But growing up, We were fishing, trapping. Many people were able to speak their language, not everyone, of course, but that's something that even now is, to speak your language is a form of resistance. And we're seeing language play an important role in film now as people are learning and reclaiming and sharing. But, I didn't necessarily go into it with that mindset. Usually my films are about something in that time. Like, I feel like they almost time capsule where I was when I share that story. So, and they always come from a personal place, because I really felt that more stories representing the culture that I'm surrounded by really needed to make itself in larger narratives. Because one thing I know about working with Indigenous people is we're all diverse and we all have our own culture teaching protocols. So it's very important that different narratives from different perspectives come out so that we can better understand the Indigenous population in Canada, but, just generally around the world. So I feel like, I'm just telling one tiny little piece of a story and it's coming from my background. But knowing that there's not many stories like that, I feel like just having those narratives out there is a form of resistance.
Yeah, I fully agree. And as you're talking, I'm imagining you creating work from a place of strength and power and abundance. It's not like this deficit model of like, I mean, I get it. There is a void and there is a lack of, representation out there, but it can be exhausting always making work in response to that lack or in response to that pushback. What I get from you and just listening to you talk about your process, Janine, is that you create work from a place of just overflowing abundance. There's so much about my culture and about me that I want to share, that I'm already sharing, but you're using different tools and different art forms to share those stories. I think that's really a powerful message for people, filmmakers and non-filmmakers alike. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to get more into this idea of resistance, belonging as resistance, and this assertion, this almost audacity that I see in the eyes and hear in the voices of some of the characters we've met in these films. This audacity to stand firmly in who you are and to assert your subjectivity. I was doing a little bit of research for this leading up to our talk, and I found an essay by an academic, Delphine Fong Gang. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I'm just going to read a short excerpt from this essay that was looking at, and it was an examination of the subjectivity of African migrants in particular in Western cities. So the excerpt reads, "The movement and or relocation of African migrants reveals diasporic subjects being in a transitional state, which is a condition of liminality, of being at the threshold, or an in-between social, cultural, economic, political, and ideological contradiction. Subjects constantly negotiate these conflicting ideologies in order to make a life for themselves in the metropolis. I argue that it is this sense of displacement, not belonging anywhere, that captures the ways in which migrant subjects struggle to find agency and be part of the new global order. In both films, we see people in varying states of in-betweenness, liminality, waiting. At times, they're moving decidedly across landscapes and being forced to cross borders, or they're walking, seemingly aimlessly through alleyways and along waterways. At other times, characters are shown sitting and waiting, and it's still others, such as Delanoy, I believe his name was, the older man in Citizens of Nowhere. He spends a lot of time waiting in less of a figurative way for his reparations, for his compensation. So while clips 3 and 4 are queued up, I'd like us to maybe talk about how does this place of being at a threshold shape identity of diasporic people? How does that positionality shape identity? What does it mean to assert your subjecthood in a world that doesn't recognize you even as a person? What does Roberto's insistence of his nationality, his commentary on his hopes and dreams, say about the way not belonging shapes identity? That's a bit of a mouthful. And what might Mia's physical transformation say about one's agency or self-determination in a post-colonial world? I love that we see her transform from this human to the salmon, and I think there's something in there that we can talk about when it comes to subjecthood. So that's clips 3 and 4.
Padres picaron caña aquí en República Dominicana por nosotros, para darnos una mejor vida a nosotros. Han dedicado todo su tiempo para eso. Y para eso han trabajado para que nosotros estudiemos. Yo no es que sea malo, pero no me gustaría trabajar en la caña, sino que me gustaría, qué sé yo, realizar mi sueño como artista o malabarista profesional, ir a la universidad, hacer una carrera, pero todos esos sueños, con esta sentencia que salió, me está tronchando el camino. Ahora no puedo hacer nada. Yo soy negro y me siento bien siendo negro. ¿Me entiendes? También me siento bien siendo hijo de haitiano, por algo que quede claro. Yo nací aquí en República Dominicana y uno es de donde uno nace. Yo soy dominicano. Yo no soy haitiano como dicen muchos. Yo nací aquí.
No, yo hablo claro porque tengo el derecho. ¿Sí? Que yo quiero ir a la capital en estos días. A ver cómo está la pensión mía. ¿Sí?
Those are both so powerful.
Who do we become when we have to wait, or when we are in places of lingering?
Yeah, no, watching that, just being a mother and listening to that young man talk about his identity, and thinking about my kids who are trying to make sense of their identity as Indigenous young men, and how that connects to them being also Canadian citizens. And then, even though we talk about, we're part of this land, in a lot of ways, we're having trouble being able to steward and speak for that land and to self-determine our own identities at times. So I feel there's so much parallels that really hit me, on a different level. But I think, what really, as you watch the film, he talks about his identity throughout, and that pride and, that resilience and wanting to share who he is, like that energy, is strong. Like, I feel like, just his being and in sharing, that's his form of resistance. But, when he talks about his family and how he articulates himself connected to that land, there's so much there in terms of, what makes identity, and how do we look at, because there's so much ways to define a culture. I don't know if you've ever seen that meme that everybody shares with just that little tip of the iceberg, and then there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
That is so true. Yeah. And even in film, we just get that, little piece of it, but those are very powerful pieces, and juxtaposed with the older gentleman and his story, and that time that he waited and is still waiting. Like, this is not something we find gets a resolve, like that continuous. And, I feel like, his energy and that strength, there's a little bit of weariness, but at the same time, that passion, that's going to be passed down to the next generation. So it still feels like there's work, but, we need those voices to speak. And especially with the narrator, like I feel like the narrator for me in this film is just key to like how it really brings all their stories to life.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just powerful.
And it's beautiful that it's, it's the voice of a revered Haitian poet who does the narration of some of these really, just poignant moments. As you were talking about your sons and their forming identity, and I'm thinking about Roberto, who is the young Dominican of Haitian descent, who's considered stateless. This is something we didn't talk about at the outset, but because I'm assuming everyone has seen the film, but just in case folks here listening haven't seen Citizens of Nowhere, it's essentially about the 2013 decision by the Dominican Republic's Supreme Court that stripped away the citizenship of anyone with Haitian parents in the Dominican Republic. And that was a retroactive decision. So it went back to 1929. So over 200,000 Dominicans with Haitian parents or ancestry were stripped of their citizenship. And here we have an elder, Delanoy, and then a young man, Roberto, and his brother, two embodiments of this this decision and what it's meant for them and their identity. So back to, your boys and just like how, even in my work with middle schoolers, so much of their identity is being shaped now by experiences, by how they see themselves reflected or not reflected in media. And I don't know. I mean, like, it's really miraculous. It's a miracle that young men like Roberto have such confidence in who they are, despite, you can just imagine all the propaganda, you can just imagine all the negativity, or all the stories saying otherwise, telling him who he is or who he's not. And yet he knows exactly who he is. This idea of ancestral knowledge, knowing his history, that's a really big part of it for me,
Oh yeah, no, definitely. When I think of my sons and I think about those connections, it really puts in perspective, like I know my sons can have the opportunity to get educated, and just to know that Roberto, that's his wish. He wants to be educated and he's denied that because he has no citizenship. And then you hear like there's no travel, and the one thing that really hit me and actually hit my sons was they weren't able to have an opportunity to, I'm sorry, I get emotional, but to raise their family with dignity. And I think, as Indigenous peoples and how we, want to raise our families, that's something too in terms of, fighting stereotypes, but also there's still a lot of systematic racism out there. We're still dealing with changing our education system in the schools to reflect more of the historical truths.
Yeah.
And, thinking my role as a mom, I've been trying to make sure they understand more oral stories and more grassroots. And, I find art and actually documentary films are a really great way to get those stories you wouldn't get in a textbook. And so, for me, just that idea, like in Indigenous culture, we had to enfranchise. So we had to give away our rights as Indigenous people in order to be educated as Canadian. And that was in like 1965 that, we were looking at our rights and starting to be able to vote and what that looked like. Even just to go to war, we had to give up our rights. So hearing that, this isn't really something of the past. This is happening right now. And, I think for me, that really hit home because, we seem to think we've come so far, but at the same time, there's still a lot of work in terms of those colonial structures that are still in place. There's a lot of dismantling and rebuilding. And so for me, I look at my sons and that they're not quite shaped. And maybe it's because, partly why I homeschool them is that I was able to help shape that upbringing and influences and build that circle. And I also see my children as my teachers. And I think for me, Roberto is a teacher. And, that's whether he can get that education through a university, that I would hope for. But he's educating us right now through this documentary just by sharing that experience and that will to get that education. So, I think we take that for granted. Like even me as an Indigenous woman, listening to that, I'm really hits you. Like it makes a really deep reality check knowing that these experiences are still happening. Because you tend to think we've come so far in my few generations, but there's still a lot of work to do. And around the world, I think, there's still lots.
Yeah, it is pretty, it can be arresting at times to think about how almost to the letter this pattern gets repeated in different parts of the world. And I love this idea that you brought up of Roberto being a teacher, and and the fact that he's an artist is beautiful as well. You mentioned art in some a little bit earlier in terms of, I see art as this container for culture, and container for the things, the sacred parts of communities that gets passed on. And I think it's just a beautiful documentary subject for them to have found somebody like Roberto, who is an artist and is teaching through his art. We see him at the end of the film working with a group of young people, teaching them a song. Presumably these are Dominican children with Haitian ancestry. And, it's almost a blessing that he's, I don't want to take this away from him if this is his dream to be in, sort of to be formally educated. But when you look at the sentiments of the professor who's featured in this film, and knowing what we know about institutions of higher learning, sometimes you have to wonder if we're not better off working outside of these institutions. And I mean, your decision to homeschool is an example of that, right? I mean, that to me is one of the loudest forms of resistance and most powerful. I don't know if there are any questions right now or comments about anything that we're discussing right now. Sarah, feel free to pop those up if there are. I feel like we've bounced around a lot of possibly, a lot of topics that might be of interest to people to go deeper into. But if not, we can keep going. We're talking about, I'm going to skip down to this because we've been talking about art. And I love that, just so you know, Eric, the clip that I'm hoping we can watch at some point is the clip, I think number 8. Yes, number 8 from Citizens of Nowhere. So this idea of imagination and art, and the fact that in both films, they couldn't be more different in a lot of ways, right? We've got this documentary feature, Haitian, Dominican, wonderful people fighting and being challenged by this state attempt to erase them, and then this really moody and what's the word? It's just a really mysterious, yet you just kind of want to lean into this short documentary. This short animation with Mia. Yet both of these characters, Mia and Roberto, I keep coming back to him, are artists. And through the power of imagination and through the power of art, I feel like Mia, the street artist, she's getting a sense of herself. She's getting a sense of home, and like her memory is reignited when she creates the art. the street art. And then there's Roberto, who's also a musician and does street performance art. And we see an example of this in the film. So I just wanted to, take a look at these scenes. There's a night scene. Shoot, I'm not sure. You know what, Eric? I'm sorry. I apologize. This might be clip 7 and clip 8, where there's a night scene that has the look. I may be wrong. It has the look and feel of Mia's world. The sound of the elements of the water and fire. The soundscape is eerie. There's impending danger, and there's performance of art at night. So definitely clip 8, Citizens of Nowhere, and then I'm not sure about whether or not we're going to see the same clip in Mia. I might have just skipped over that. Anyway, let's take a look at clip 8. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Art and imagination.
Sí, nosotros no existíamos. Nosotros no somos de ese mundo. Salió una ley ahora de ley de naturalización. O sea que nos van a dar un documento como extranjeros. Yo lo que creo que hay un poquito de discriminación. ¿Sí? Discriminación racial. Ahora para sobrevivir lo que yo hago es show callejero. No le echo la culpa a todo a la sentencia de la resolución 12. No. También le doy la gracia a Dios, porque Dios nos da esa oportunidad, por algo pasa eso.
Yeah, that was the clip. So there were moments during that clip. I remember closing my eyes. I watched it a couple times, closing my eyes, and I felt like I was in Mia's world. And it was just this moment where the two films came together for me, because there's so much of Mia's world that is just this eerie kind of silence, and a lot of her world is at night as well. But let's talk about this idea of art as survival, art as a vessel. He brings up art, he brings up God and spirituality right after he says art, is part of his survival. I think those two things are closely linked. So what role does art play in establishing a sense of belonging or even a sense of home?
Are we putting up another clip or?
No, sorry. It's not. There is no other clip for this particular section. I was mistaken.
Oh well, yeah. Actually, the question reminds me a lot about my mom. Like when I was growing up, I actually didn't think I was going to be an artist. I thought I was going to be either a bush pilot or a police officer or run my own business. But one thing I realized, watching, because my mom, my uncle, all my family were artists, and that's partly how they moved to Regina. And what I noticed was those experiences of intergenerational trauma, and for them residential school trauma, and how they were able to express emotions through their paintings, because they were visual artists, and then they also, did other forms of art. But, the stories that came from it, and how they were able to use that art to share those stories and those emotions in a way that also made it safe for them, because it wasn't just directly almost like a testimony. It was, it allowed for, I guess, a sounding board or something to really amplify. But, when it's a powerful art piece, it speaks for itself too. But what I really love about being an oral storyteller is the more you get to know a piece and a person and a place and where it's from, you can really unpack a piece of artwork in a way that you just it's just hard to read in a book. Not that, I love books and, but I think the visual part of it really speaks because we didn't actually have art for art's sake in our culture. It was always part of our clothing. It was a part of how we expressed ourselves. It was protection. There was always some function to it. And for me, that felt like for them to share those with me, they were able to transmit lessons to me that I was able to start my healing journey. And then from that, I was able to start doing stories that's why I say it's also partly where I'm at. So my first layer of stories were always addressing a form of trauma and overcoming it. But, I'm older now and I feel like, the biggest thing I'm concerned about is having authentic experiences with my sons and giving them holistic teachings. So I feel that experience really helped them. And it was art. Like everything that I was able to transmit in a good way came from art. So, I thank my mom, but honestly, she would thank Louis Riel in this case because, he said his people were going to sleep for 100 years and it was going to be art that woke them up.
I was
And,
not aware of that Louis Riel quote. And believe it or not, tomorrow in class, we're talking about the Red River Rebellion. And can you repeat that quote, that Riel quote?
his people will sleep for 100 years and they'll wake up and it'll be art. I'm sure it's better quoted somewhere. But, my mom would always share that with us because she knew there was going to be almost like a renaissance of healing through art that was going to happen. And, sometimes you dismiss your mother, but then when you start to see it unfold, that's when you're like, I just want to be like my mom. So, I think that wisdom that's there and, she'd always say it's human behavior and patterns. So, I feel like when you can kind of oversee those bigger patterns, there's a little bit more hope. But when you're in the thick of your trauma or what you're enduring, and it's often hard to see that even just moving as slow as you can is resistance.
Right. Absolutely. Or picking up a brush or picking up a pen or a camera is resistance. Just even if what is being created is never going to be shared. I think there is so much healing. I know there is so much healing and grace in the process of like walking through whatever feeling, whatever emotion you might be, experiencing and trusting the artistic, the creative process, trusting in that process of, and allowing the healing, allowing the salve to wash over you. I think that is, in itself, like you said, a form of resistance, and this is a form of subversion as well. Like I think there are so many pieces of music and dances, and I just think about the rhythms and the coded language and music that was meant for a group of people so that the colonists or master couldn't understand what was being said or what was being transmitted. Like there's some real subversion and that chants even that we hear at protests today, and the forms of art and oral storytelling. I just feel like there is, again, it's beautiful to see that pattern across the entire world. It really does speak to who we are as human beings, and it's definitely at work here in the world of Citizens of Nowhere. We have a question here. Jesse here, please say Red River Resistance as a Métis person, this is how we would talk about it. It was the government that called it a rebellion. Thank you so much, Jesse. And we're talking earlier about language, and I am so, I I implore my students to make corrections, even just on how their names are pronounced. You know, it's so important. So I humbly accept that that correction, and it's super important. Agreed. Thank you for voicing that, Daniel, with me and myself. Eating. I'm connected to my birth grandmother, who I found out was a very avid and talented beater.
Oh, hi, Tawny.
Thank you for that quote. Yeah, it's so mind-blowing to me how much work there is to do in terms of countering the narrative. Even that, you know, that blunder that I made by using the word rebellion, that's plastered in every textbook I've ever read as a student. And this is not making excuses by any means. I take full responsibility. But you know, it's still the language in the books that our students are reading and consuming. We have to combat it at every turn. We have to confront it and fix it. And it can be exhausting. Sometimes that's where the art comes in for me, because it's not as exhausting for me to, you know, pour myself into a script, or to, you know, edit video, or to, you know, write poetry. That labor, even though it's doing the work of protest, it's doing the work of confronting colonialism, it's doing the work of resistance, it doesn't feel like work because it's art. And so in that sense, I feel like art can be so life sustaining, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree, which is why, you know, I've committed myself to working with artists and supporting artists in any way I can. And that's partly why I love working at the Banff Center. It gives me that place to do that work. But I also really love working in film and supporting stories to come out there, because I feel like it's not just my story. There's a lot of stories that need to be shared. And I feel like I've been blessed over the years to be surrounded by really wonderful storytellers. And, you know, just to see their stories make it into mainstream culture, like for me, that's, you know, we got to support each other on that journey, you know, whether we're, you know, Indigenous or not. It's creating that discourse and being comfortable correcting each other. Like, I know I've made a lot of mistakes in terms of learning my language, and, you know, I'm still learning, and I often make mistakes and get corrected through my dad, but that's good learning for me. But, you know, I think one thing, just visually looking at both films, you know, one thing that was really prominent is this, I guess, tension between, like, say, the urban environment in both places and that sense of land. Because, you know, as an Indigenous person, like, anytime I can touch like a little piece of grass or hug a tree or hold a rock, you know, that's my form of connection. And, you know, when I moved from La Ronge to Saskatoon and then later to Regina, you know, there is nature out there, but it's a little harder to find. And sometimes, you know, that mentally can do something and emotionally to you. So finding those places to ground you is so important. But when you watch both of those films, it feels like just to find that space is very difficult. And then, you know, like, I think the word they used in Mia was industrial violence and impact. And, you know, that term really resonated with me, because we seem to label that as progress and development, but yet, you know, to the Indigenous people who had a story for our landmark, you know, and I think what they said, Haiti or Dominican Republic, a thousand hills. I can't remember. It's referenced in the movie, but
in the beginning, yes, I forget the exact reference, but I think it might have a record number of hills or mountains, very mountainous area, and that is a really beautiful connection again between these two seemingly you know, different pieces of art. They both happen to be made in 2015 as well. I found that to be of interest. Janine, this has been really wonderful. I knew that we would come to, you know, this moment in the evening, and we're starting to wrap up, and, you know, we could go on for a long time. There were a couple clips we didn't get to, but I just hope, that folks who didn't get a chance to see the films ahead of time, do that. Hopefully this conversation has piqued your interest, and you will make a point of getting a membership on Vukavu and taking a look at these films while they're still up for free. Is there anything that I didn't get to or that we didn't get to that you just want to make sure we say before we wrap up?
Just thinking about an Indigenous teaching, like we talk about Wakotowin, which is kinship with each other. And it's not just kinship with person to person, it's kinship with the land and how we connect. And, I think once we can find that again, that's going to be the strongest form of resistance, because within that worldview, there's support structures for each other. And, just thinking about citizens of nowhere and how they have the two governments positioned, but yet those oral narratives that can come out and those connections, because they're not so disconnected when you start listening to their stories in there. And, I think that's the same for Indigenous people, and even, talking to settlers and people coming to Canada and what narratives they hear.
Yep, diasporic Africans, people of the Caribbean. There's this definite, this through line of community, and despite what might be happening on a sort of state level, you see these small groups of families, coming together. And I mean, in that sense, there's a true belonging when you have, two or more gathered in the name of authenticity, in the spirit of resistance. I think that's at its heart what belonging is all about. So I'm really grateful that we were able to get to all these big ideas through 2 films, and that we were able to do that in 45 minutes of time. It's been an incredibly rich discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you for hosting me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this has been it's been so wonderful, and I'm going to keep thinking about Roberto as teacher and your boys, your teenage boys, and how much we can continue to learn from young people around us. Is going to stay with me, and even the the things that I learned tonight, just being open and being part of this conversation with you. So again, I'd just like to thank everybody who is out there in the beyond this screen. We can't see you, but we can feel your presence. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much to the filmmakers behind Citizens of Nowhere and Mia, Regina Public Library, folks there, Wendy Pert, Sarah Pittman, Eric Hill, Thomas Johnson. Thank you to Alyssa Farron of the Dunlop Art Gallery, Vukavu, and of course to Janine. Thank you. Be sure, this is not the last the last you'll see of Janine. Be sure to register for her upcoming program with Dunlop Art Gallery, Indigenous Storytelling Through Films, where Jessie Short and Janine share their stories, experiences, and work, and discuss how their films provide opportunities for cross-cultural exchange. Kind of like what we're having right now, right? This program takes place on Zoom. You must register with your library card at reginapubliclibrary.ca. The link for the program has been posted or will be posted in the comment section as well. Remember to tune into our next film school, which will be live streamed on Thursday, March 4th at 7 p.m. Central Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern, on RPL Film Theater's Facebook and YouTube channels. And finally, we'd like you to take a moment to fill out an evaluation form. The link has been posted in the comment section as well. These are anonymous, and Regina Public Library Film Theater values your feedback and would very much like you to fill those out. Anything? Have I forgotten anything? Oh, just the last thing. February 8th, I already said that. You can watch the films until February 8th. I think that's it. Yeah.
I think it sounds great. And my boys did say this is great homeschooling, both videos.
Nice. Thumbs up from
Yeah.
teenagers in general. That's a tough crowd, so I'm so
Yeah.
glad you shared the films with them, and that says everything. That's amazing. Awesome. Sounds like you got two wonderful kids there. Okay, I think that's it. It's 9 p.m. our time, 8 p.m. somewhere else in the world. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks again, Janine.
Yeah,
Love
thank
meeting
you.
with you. Bye, everyone.